Tales of Xillia. There, we did it. Totally not how it's actually pronounced, but I said it! You win, Twitter! Sorry, I had to get that out of my system. The 13th mothership title in the series, and technically the first entry made specifically for the PS3, we're analyzing a big title in an already big franchise. And before you say anything, I already know, Zafre, what do you mean 13th title in the series? You haven't analyzed any other Tales games. Why the heck are you starting with this one? I get it, it's weird and different to all of us that I'm going out of order, but we can handle it, I promise. Couple of reasons I'm starting with this game instead of the beginning of the Tales series, but let me explain. First things first, if you're new to this channel, welcome. It's great to have you here, and if you're a regular around here, good to see you too. And I'd like to properly introduce a sort of Tales of retrospective. It's clear that I have an affection for this series given the gobs and gobs of video essays and whatnot surrounding it, so this day was inevitable. I have tons of opinions on every single game, as well as some games that I haven't played yet, so I thought why not analyze the entire series. As for the weird order, well, this series is gonna have a couple of firsts for me as well. It's no secret that my knowledge of the series is limited to the 3D titles, and if I were to go in order, I'd start with Symphonia. I don't think that'd sit well with me to finish the 3D titles then go back to the 2D ones, so instead of waiting for me to play through the entirety of the franchise's 2D library just so we can get a proper order, let's go for a different sequence. It'll be fun, and I don't have to wait to talk about these games. I'm just so excited, you feel? That being said, we're gonna at least talk about every mothership title regardless of the language barrier, and maybe talk about the spin-offs. Depends on my mood. I just wanted to start with Xillia because it's what I believe to be the best starting point for newcomers, and I felt like it. So, yeah, I think that explains enough, so why don't we get into the actual review? After playing through this entry again, looking for things that worked and didn't, can I still call this a great entry in a series, or did I pick the wrong game to start this retrospective off? Let's kick back, take a deep breath, grab a delicious, refreshing glass of water, and please lower your standards, because I'll be answering that with just a Tales of Xillia analysis by the overly optimistic Tales tuber Zafre. Starting with context. Can't be assuming everyone knows what we're talking about. I mean, what is a Xillia? Alright, let's do this one last time. Development of the game started shortly after Tales of Hearts R, the original on the DS. You know, the one we didn't get. When the game was first revealed, we were shown the two main characters, Jude and Mila, and the game's main theme, an RPG of unwavering convictions. Big plus already, we've got the series' first female in the spotlight. Bit of a bummer she's not a standalone protagonist, as that would come a bit later in the franchise, but it's a start. And a blonde woman in the spotlight that doesn't generate a lot of controversy is very welcome in my book. We were in for a potentially different way of storytelling, since not only is this the first game with a woman as a protagonist, but there isn't just one lead. We've yet to have a game in this series with one major storyline split between two protagonists, and that theme was intriguing. Interest was earned. Eventually, the rest of the party was shown off: Alvin, Elise, Rowan, and Leia, as well as the game's opening cutscene, which is one of the best in the series. Why? Two reasons. One, the song Progress is one of my personal favorite intro songs in the series, and two, it was animated by Ufotable, the animation company that's been doing the Tales series anime cutscenes to this day, starting here. Fun fact about me, Ufotable is my favorite anime company when it comes to sheer animation, because holy freaking crap. Before I fell off watching anime, I was a big fan of the Fate shows made by them. You know, Unlimited Blade Works and Phase Zero. Why? Because of stuff like this. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh shit. This stuff's dope, and you're telling me I'm getting them on board with my Tales games? God bless you, Bamco. This game was seeming more and more like something special for this series, with all the hype and development running smoothly, but then there were time constraints. Yeah, for those unaware, Tales of Xillia was somewhat rushed near the end of its development cycle, which ended up biting in the butt in more ways than one. Specifically, some content had to be cut, like 2 playable characters that were later added to the game's sequel, that of which most likely existing due to all the stuff that had to be cut. What a bummer too, because is it just me, or did this game have some of the best build-up and development up to this point? What is it with companies feeling the need to rush out their product? We've all played Persona 5, right? Listen to that game and take your time. It's all good. We'll buy the game whenever it comes out. Nah, whatever. This game came out almost 8 years ago. Oh my god. Some of you might be saying, wait a minute, this game came out in 2013. That wasn't 8 years ago from the day this video went up. Half right. The game was released in Japan all the way back to September of 2011, and the rest of us wouldn't get it until almost 2 years later in August of 2013. This means, technically, Xillia is an early PS3 game and was a bit later in the console's lifespan everywhere else. Hey, at least it made it, but man, That's rough, buddy. Xillia seemed to have smooth development right up until the end, but despite that, did the game end up as it should have? Judging by review scores, people seem to think that the game was alright. Notice lots of 7 out of 10s, which in my eyes is good, but nothing special. Most of the praise came from the battle system, as the general consensus was that it was fast and fun. People also seemed to like the story, but the cast was received with mixed reception, and people barely even talked about anything regarding presentation, so take that as you will. Of course, critics aren't really my go-to when it comes to how well a game's reputation is. I turn to the fans for gauging a game's quality, specifically you guys. I took to Twitter and asked my peeps there at twitter.com/ZaffreRevo. Once again, I'm proving to be a freaking genius because I assumed this was a well-loved game, and sure enough, it is. The worst being people saying that it was an okay game overall, and Dan saying that he slept through the whole thing. Big yikes. It seems like a lot of people really like this game, of course with exceptions here and there, and playing through it a second time along with Xillia 2 back to back made me realize a lot of things about both games. We'll be starting with the first for now, but we'll get to that sequel eventually. In the end, we're answering the following. Did having two protagonists help or hinder the story? Is this truly a game that dissects the themes of one's convictions and duty well enough? How does the gameplay and combat glue it all together? Did it suffer from the rushed portions of the development process, and in what way? Lots to talk about as we're analyzing a freaking JRPG, so let's start off simple with how the game looks and sounds, since that has importance as well. Not to mention it eases me into this because I'm still scared that we're diving into a 40-hour beast here. This game's a very interesting one to talk about when it comes to its presentation. Let me start off by saying that the game has one of the best art styles in the series. The character and world designs are some of my favorites, spells are breathtaking, and the color palette is so vibrant yet easy on the eyes, making for a great aesthetic overall. It's one of the prettiest games in the series, and also one of the most outdated in terms of pure graphical capabilities. Yeah, on a technical level, this game leaves quite a bit to be desired. The fact that this game is actually an early PS3 title that we didn't get until much later shows. Models are never better than decent, animations and regular cutscenes stem from non-existent to just alright, and in towns, the game has a miserable time loading all the people and assets. The engine tries to do a lot with the hardware, but the PS3 was not up to snuff with the developer's vision. The battle system also suffers from this, but we'll get more into that a bit later. I'm not gonna go so far as to call it ugly, but it could have been better. Fortunately, there are some good aspects technically. While standard cutscenes have average animations, this game has a bunch of pre-rendered scenes that include very fluid character movement and action choreography. These were really cool, and I only wish that there were more. If the whole game was animated like this, it'd be incredible, but there are enough, I'd say. Animations on the battle system are also great, not just the spells, and look ridiculously fluid when they hit that 60 frame mark. However, the crown jewels are the anime cutscenes. Ufotable always brings the heat with their animation, as I've already shown, and this game is no exception. These things are to die for. They look better than I remembered. The colors, movement, effects, fight scenes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's so beautiful. Ufotable is so good, guys, and I'm glad they're sticking around with the games. The best only deserves the best, after all. That being said, ever notice that the sound is much lower in these cutscenes than the rest of the game? It's not just for Xillia, but like every Tales game has this problem. What's up with that? There's a part in this game that keeps shifting from normal cutscenes to anime back and forth, and the volume mixing is all over the place. Like, you go from Mila whispering sweet things into your ear to shouting about her mission to protect all humans and spirits. It's odd, and not too big of an issue, but it's bothered me for so long, and I just gotta unwind, man. Other than that, everything regarding the sound in this game is top notch. I'd say voice work is on par with Tales of Vesperia, a game I believe to have the best voice acting done in the series. Everyone is so expressive, they back their lines with more than the needed amount of emotion, and that goes without saying thanks to the all-star cast we have here. I could list the whole voice cast if I wanted. Kudos to everyone. As for the soundtrack, let me start off by saying it's pretty darn small. Like, smaller than you'd think. Every town has a unique track, sure, but many dungeons share these atmospheric songs, some have tracks that are taken from cutscenes, and there are even a few that have nothing. It's kind of weird and somewhat lazy, making me feel like it was a product of the game being rushed, which is a bit of a shame. I say this because what we do have, other than the songs that are simply background noise, is top freaking tier. Every town theme, a couple of the dungeons, world map tracks, the bosses, and especially the battle themes are dope. And fun fact, there are two sets of battle themes, one for Jude and one for Mila, which is so cool. For those curious, I think that Mila's are just a bit better, but that's not to knock Jude's down at all. It's like 1% less good than Mila's. There are even a couple of character themes. Not every single party member has one, which is a slight bummer, but the ones we do have are so good. I love it when characters have a song specifically tailored to them, so if this series were to give more, ideally one for every character, I'll be one happy boy. I'd say the fact that my biggest complaint about the soundtrack is that there should have been more more as an achievement. This OST is a great even. In general, the game's presentation is pretty solid. Sure, graphics technically aren't that great, whatever, but I still like looking at this game due to the art style and designs. And besides, everything else struts their stuff like it's nobody's business, so who cares? Now let's talk about that story, starting off with a bit of a summary and synopsis for those who need their memories refreshed or haven't played the game. Mila, this girl, is Rize Maxia's iteration of Maxwell this time around. Maxwell is a Tales series staple, as almost every game has an old white guy in a chair who's the lord of all spirits and some super powerful being. This time we've got a hot blonde chick, so rip. The four great spirits tell her many spirits have been dying as of late and decides to investigate what's going on. Turns out that some giant weapon called the Lance of Kresnik is being used, which apparently is no good, so she rushes off to destroy it in the city of Fenmont. This is where our second protagonist, Jude, lives on a school campus, studying to become a doctor. He's trying to get in contact with his professor, but instead runs into Mila, who's breaking into a research facility which happens to be the location of the Lance and the professor. The two part ways after a chance encounter and one almost drowning the other, and Jude unfortunately finds his professor dying in some sort of test tube. Jude then runs into Psycho Flame Girl, and nearly gets his butt kicked until Mila steps in. She doesn't have too much trouble, I guess. The two of them find a Lance, and I guess Jude's just tagging along for the ride now, but Psycho Flame Girl messes with some techie stuff, and uh-oh, they fall! Mila and Jude die. And that's the whole story for Tales of Xillia. Kind of a short game this time around, but I mean, it was alright, I guess. But seriously, they escaped due to protagonist powers, I guess, and with the Lance out of Mila's grasp, she has to try and get it again. Jude's all like, yeah, you do you, baby, and starts heading home until he notices that Mila can barely fend for herself anymore. Turns out that the Lance took away her powers, and she no longer has control over the four great spirits, which she used for pretty much everything, even swinging a sword. Jude decides to help her get out of town, being the good boy that he is, but uh-oh, she kind of broke into a building or whatever, so I guess that makes her a criminal. That means that Jude's a criminal too. Oops. They manage to escape with some help from Alvin, this guy who just showed up, but what do you do? And they embark on their journey with Mila. Their goal? Destroy the Lens of Kresnik before it destroys all spirits, as those are the main source of how people on Rize Maxia live their lives. By casting spirit arts working alongside them, they can have light, heal wounds, so on and so forth. We can't have them all dying now. And it's up to us to find out who's behind this and tell them they're doing a no-no. This is our main conflict, but as 40-hour journeys usually do, there are twists and turns aplenty to keep things interesting. That being said, it rarely loses focus, and I think that's what ultimately makes the story solid. Playing through it this most recent time made me realize that I was kind of wrong saying that the story is rather weak. It's actually really freaking good. This is a bit of a split thing, but in my opinion, this plot doesn't get nearly enough credit. There are a lot of different things going on that sends the story in a bunch of directions, but because of that, it never stops being interesting. Most of the time. There are one or two parts where the story is put on halts and they ultimately amount to nothing too satisfying, but for about 38 hours of the story, it was solid the whole way through. But even still, the game has a lot more focus than I thought. The role of main antagonist was the big deal breaker for me, as it seemed to be a game of hot potato and our conflict was seemingly changing every time we had a new villain in the hot seat. But no matter who it was, they wanted to use the Lance for their own reasons, therefore your goal remained the same. And I say the role of main antagonist seemed to change, but it really was the same person you find at the end who was truly our major opposing force. They always wanted that Lance, and it's their right-hand men that caused crap to happen, like at the beginning of the game in the research facility with Psycho Flame Girl, and at the Sea Haven. The others are simply more antagonists, and they work by driving the story and characters forward. In fact, I'd say this game has one of the best groups of opposing forces to the protagonists in the series. Every single one of them has more depth than you think, and even though there are a lot of them, I don't think any suffer because of that. The main two especially are some of my favorite written characters in the series because of how well they reflect the game's themes and how much they get done as antagonists. And I noticed a lot of you felt the same way, for good reason. The pacing was great, the motivations were there, problems were naturally being solved. I'd say this narrative was on point until... Ooh. Yeah, it doesn't quite stick the landing. This is what I believe to be the biggest aspect of this game affected by it being rushed. Things started getting sloppy around the end, and a few of you brought attention to this too, so it's kinda noticeable. Things were just sorta happening left and right, solutions would pop up, and before you knew it, whoops, we're at the final boss. Not to mention, around the end of the game, this big area opens up, and you'd think that there'd be a ton to explore, but all you get is one town, 2 dungeons, one of which being optional, and an area that the game classifies as a dungeon, but it's 1 room. Super underwhelming, and it's like there was a lot more planned ahead, but to meet a deadline they stopped, and I don't know man, that's kinda whack. It's because of that that my first time through, I thought this story as a whole was a bit on the lame side of things. Of course, now I know that the story is good, but even still, the end is important. I wasn't even a fan of the actual ending, as half the characters didn't have too satisfying of a conclusion. This stung extra hard because they all went through this great journey of discovering themselves, only to end up saying, I'm still figuring it out, and that made me sad. When it was all said and done, my first thought was, well, at least there's a sequel, and I don't think that's a sign for a fulfilling conclusion, and something that frustrates the hell out of me. I can't emphasize enough how solid things were in the beginning and middle, only to fall right where it ended and arguably mattered most. But alas, it is done, and hopefully the sequel will pick up the slack and make for a better conclusion for these characters. And while we're on the negatives in regards to the story, I think it would have been a lot better if it wasn't split into two. The dual protagonist is a cool idea on paper, but let me tell you why it doesn't work in a 40-hour JRPG, and then let me tell you why it doesn't work for this game. JRPGs are long, dude, and when you play one, you don't always want to immediately jump back in for another round. For shorter ones like The World Ends With You and Chrono Trigger, both excellent games, go play them, they take around 15 to 20 hours, even less so in repeat playthroughs, so it's much more digestible. Tales of Xillia is a big boy, and I don't know about you, but I've got too many other titles to play through to warrant going through this beast of a game immediately again. No matter who you pick, you get the general gist of the narrative, you just miss out on some exclusive content. That's not really enough to justify an instant replay so I can get the entire experience, but that's the thing, I'm missing out on the entire experience. What happened when Jude was away for a bit? Where did Mila go here while I was away? What did these two party members talk about while I wasn't able to listen? It's just so frustrating to know that I missed out on something because I picked the other character, you know? It's especially worse in Xillia's case, being that it's Tales. The story is all about the characters. You can't miss a beat with these guys' development, or some stuff will seem unnatural, and it's your fault for picking the wrong character. And this game does a terrible job balancing out who gets what scenes, because I'll say this right now, Jude's campaign is miles better than Mila's. When I first played this, I picked Mila because, hello, first female protagonist, I want to support that and let Bamco know that we want more of this. But hers focuses way too much on her character, which is a very interesting one, but what about the rest of the cast? They don't get nearly the amount of screen time they deserve, and it makes Jude seem like a punk who just got really cool out of nowhere. You miss all the major character development for the characters that grow the most, and that was annoying as heck. Finn puts it best. There's a moment in the game where if you're playing as Jude, it's the best part of the story, but Mila's side has the worst part. It's that kind of unbalanced. When I asked you all which one you played first and which one was better, I was kind of surprised that most of you picked Jude's first, but not so surprised when you all said his was better. It really does feel like more of the entire experience, where Mila's goes more in depth with her character and everyone else sort of gets sidelined. She's a great character, don't get me wrong, but the party does need more balancing, especially when they're as well written as they are. Tales games, if anything, have well-written characters that bring with them fun interactions, character development, and depth. The bar for characterization in these games is a high one, but even still, Xillia surpasses it with flying colors like nobody's business. This game's cast is freaking phenomenal, and it's interesting because I'd say that the theme is a big reason to thank for that. Xillia absolutely nails the themes this game's trying to convey really well. It's one of the best in the series in that regard. I mean, when your writing team is this good at characterization and your story has a main theme focused on characters growing and figuring out what to do with themselves, that's bound to succeed. The main cast is full of people who have no idea what to do with themselves given the situation they're in. Jude is a college student who's unsure where he wants to go in life, so is simply going through the motions. Graduate college, get a job, you know the gist. Alvin's all kinds of messed up. Elise has been alone for her whole life, Rowan's running away from his past, and Leia's sticking around with her family instead of figuring out what to do with herself. Everyone's struggling with finding some purpose, some conviction. I'd say Mila's the only one who's got it together for the beginning, even if she begins to struggle with that near the middle of the game, making for a character to act as an inspiration for the rest of them and a catalyst for their own growth, all the while getting some development herself. It's such an awesome formula for success, you know? Not to mention, every single one of these party members are likable from the get-go. Luke from Abyss seemed to have made this unspoken template where a good character has to change from unlikable to the most lovable teddy bear in existence, but that's not really the case. I'd argue that Jude grows to the same degree as Luke, but the whole way through, I loved his character and rooted for him just as hard when he finally came around. He's a freaking mess for about 70% of the game because he simply has no care for where he goes or what he does, much to the frustration of a few party members. It's only when he runs into Mila and helps her out with her mission that he starts to find meaning in his life, but he still can't think for himself when he needs to. There's a part in the game where the party splits up and Jude's alone with Alvin and Elise, and for most of the time, things go like, where do you want to go, Jude? Where do you want to go? I'm just following you. Elise? I'll go wherever you want, Jude. Okay. This man simply relies on others and things to work themselves out too much, which should be annoying, but he's such a good boy with a heart of gold. He's always trying to help everyone out. His struggle is just him needing to help himself out and being able to grow into his own person. That gives him the kind of depth other protagonists in this series have while staying likable over the course of the entire game, making for one of my personal favorite characters this series has seen. When he finally comes around in his turning point, it's so earned. It feels so right, not to mention completely natural. And that moment where you're about to fight the final boss and he starts talking about his newfound motivation and his steam blares at full blast gave me goosebumps, and I got so emotional for all the right reasons. What a great character, and indeed a precious boy. He's also a great protagonist alongside Mila because she fills the role just as well, only for different reasons. Where Jude is all about becoming someone worthy of being titled the protagonist, Mila already fits that bill and is about helping out the other characters grow for a while before realizing she needs some help herself. Because of this, she's both a character that doesn't grow as much to help characters that need the developing do just that, while at the same time developing enough to somewhat work and get the best of both worlds. By the end, she never loses her motivation on her mission per se, but her reasoning just shifts to a more educated and inspirational one for protecting humans and spirits to truly act as this world's Maxwell. Not to mention she gets the added bonus of going through a fish out of water arc. Don't let her lovely looks fool you, she's still a spirit in the shape of a human, and while she's watched and admired their customs, she's never personally done any of them, making for a lot of fun scenes and side quests. One of my favorite moments in the game is near the beginning when the party is still just her, Jude, and Alvin, and she eats for the first time as a human. She's having the time of her life, enjoying a well-prepared meal and just being thankful to experience the little things people do, and it's so wholesome. Both protagonists are excellent in their own ways, and as characters, I'd say the dual protagonist idea works in that regard. It's just how the story presents itself with the two where I have a problem. Neither character suffers when looking at the narrative in retrospect, so that's good. Both protagonists hit the mark, and the rest of the main party all portray the themes of the game in their own ways while having satisfying arcs almost the whole way through. Chalk that up as another reason why this game's final moments aren't as good. By the time we're near the final part of the game, the characters have already gone through their growth. They're done carrying their portions of the story, and combined with the story itself just kinda losing steam, it's all a big pile of blah that makes me sad. Sorry, positives. The cast also thrives in terms of interactions. The dynamic and chemistry between characters are all on point, and because of this cast being a smaller one with only 6 characters, they feel more like a family. I love seeing Jude and Leia bicker like an old married couple, Mila and Alvin's unspoken trust and respect, and Rowan acting like a father figure towards Elise. Skits are all so good because of these, on top of being well written and surprisingly hilarious. You would not believe how quotable this game gets. Need I mention the legend of the Bazongas? And as a series first, the characters will even have little lines while you're walking in the overworld commenting on little things you see or achieve, making them feel like real people. Like finding treasure, walking through tight holes, or just on the weather. And by all means, please, keep talking. Other than the end, pacing for the rest of the journey was excellent. The themes and characters worked hand in hand, making for some of the best in both aspects across the series, and the antagonists kept things rolling while being Gucci characters. If it were one big story instead of being split into 2, and it wasn't rushed near the end so they could do everything they wanted, dare I say it, it would have been one of the top 3 best in the franchise along with the likes of Berseria and Abyss. It might have gone on even longer than it already is, which could be too much, but given the pacing and writing quality of this entry, you never know what they could pull. As is though, it's still pretty great, so I can deal. Now we just need to see if what we're actually doing as the player for all that time can be just as good, if not better. I mean, if you're not enjoying what you're playing, then why bother? Let's go ahead and link up with the gameplay. Let's take care of the combat system first, as that makes for the real meat and potatoes of the gameplay. This game came at a weird time for the series. Vesperia had mastered the battle system that Abyss introduced, and Graces came in with its own completely different and never before seen. What do? Continue on by evolving the new Graces combat style, or keep going with Vesperia like the series have been doing already? Maybe go back to the freaking 2D titles so we can actually play them in America? Nah? Alright, cool. Xillia takes the best of both Graces and Vesperia and combines both into its own style. Because of this, we get a system that takes the general 2D movement with free run 3D options, TP, and standard attacks on top of arts like Vesperia and Abyss, but with AC inspired from Graces CC, and that game is much faster speed. The official name for this is the Double Raid Linear Motion Battle System. That was not a joke, by the way. A giant combination of what worked in both styles, so whether you're into what Graces introduced or Vesperia mastered, there's something here for you. Combat is a lot of fun, it really is. The speed is there for sure, controls are way cleaned up being that aerial combos are much easier to pull off for one, and everything feels so tight. Rather than building up your combo length with skills, you can do as many attacks and arts in a row as you want so long as you have AC to spare. When you're out, just wait a second and you'll be filled right back up. Simple and clean is the way that this game is making me feel tonight. Every character is fun to play as too, along with having their own little gimmick to differentiate themselves from the rest of the group. This has been somewhat of a thing already, but never to this degree, and I like that a lot. Backstep with perfect timing as Jude and you'll zip around the opponent for an easy combo. Tap an elemental art button to use a strike art as Mila, or hold it for a full-on spell. Hold the art button when using an art as Alvin to combine his gun and sword for an altered, more powerful version of the same art. You get the picture, and encourages players to try out different characters even more. It's a big reason why I and you guys hold this combat in such high regard. There are lots of interesting mechanics to use here. My favorites to play as were Jude and Mila, Leia, and Elise, all thanks to how fun they are to play simply based off of their classes and the unique gimmicks they provide. Although don't get me wrong, I played as Alvin and Rowan quite a bit as well and enjoyed their playstyles too. Not to mention, this game's skill system only adds more unique capabilities to each character, and the skill system in general is one of the better ones in this franchise. You level up and you earn Lilium Orb points to use on your Lilium Orb, a grid that you fill up over the course of the game to unlock more arts, buffs, and skills, as well as skill points needed to register said skills. It's simple, easy to understand, and emphasizes constant growth over the course of the game, a necessity with JRPGs, let alone long video games. Plus, skills only enhance the gameplay, as you gotta keep battling from being repetitive since you'll be doing them all the time. Gotta get new toys to play with, otherwise things will grow stale. In terms of the base game, there are a lot of things here that really sell it and show how far the series has come, including your basic improvements in the form of additional features, and of course the new mechanics of this game's battle system. Let's start with the former, as one general improvement that I'm surprised took this long to implement was auto items. In the past, characters would at the most request to use items in battle, and you could press a button to allow it or cancel the request. In Xillia, you can set auto items on so that the characters will just use the item depending on the priority and circumstances you set. This way you don't have to move over to a button in order to cancel or accept an item usage request, and you don't have to head to the pause menu and select an item you need immediately every single time. The characters will just go ahead and do it. This helped me out of tight spaces a lot, and is definitely one of my favorite aspects of this game. Just make sure you don't forget to set a limiter or keep an eye on how much you have. I forgot to do that, and my items bag was looking kinda sad more times than not. Also, for the first time in the series to my knowledge, you can swap party members out mid-battle. Due to some characters being more effective against other enemies thanks to this game's big unique combat mechanic we'll go over in a second, it only makes sense that you should be able to change party members at the drop of a hat. Not to mention, it's just so freaking convenient and an excellent feature I hope to see as we cover the games that came after this. The ones before get a pass, I suppose. Then there's the big one, the game's unique feature to stand out in the series, and that would be linking. When you press the D-pad towards another party member, you'll link with them, simple as that. This makes it so that you can do combos together, they'll cover you while you're casting, handle enemies that try to attack from behind, and more importantly, use special link arts that are accessible when you filled up the link gauge to certain increments. Fill it up completely and you'll activate this game's iteration of overlimit through usage of a link dart, where you can spam link darts one after another and later use this game's collection of the oh so satisfying mystic arts. Again, combat is pretty good in this game. It simply can't be understated how fast and responsive this game is. You press a button, you do it in an instant, unless you're in the middle of an animation for another movement, in which case your character will do your input right after. Combos are quick and look cool, auto items help with team synergy while being straight up convenient, and linking provides a lot of strategic angles to come at battles with. Link darts are so fun to do too, and when you're in overlimit, chaining a bunch of them back to back and switching who you're linked with mid-combo to keep the chain going feels so good. Not to mention all the different enemies that are easier to deal with when linked to certain characters. This game takes a lot of liberties to make this game's unique cool thing the best it can possibly be. While Tales games normally rely on team synergy, which this game does as well, there's a lot of partnership aspects here that are really interesting as well. And they all work because the AI in this game is really freaking smart. Elise tends to heal whenever I want her to, Rowan protects me with magic guard when necessary, and generally the AI always did what I needed to without me having to give them direct commands. Linking is easily the best part of this combat system, and combined with the base gameplay being snappy and fun with all these additions and improvements, this is a really cool battle system. It could have been my favorite, but the problems I have with it keep it from claiming that title just barely. Let's go ahead and go over them. First and foremost, this game is way too easy, and I think this is because of the tons and tons of options at your disposal. You move and hit so fast that enemies in the overworld barely have a chance to react, and you can simply combo them to death. Not to mention, it's so easy to spam a move over and over again because of how this game's AC system works on top of the crazy speed. That's right, this game's speed is both a blessing and a curse. In past Tales games other than Grace's, you couldn't really spam unless you were in overlimit, but like Grace's, because we use the CC and AC system, you can do the same thing so long as you have AC to go around. It was fine in said Grace's because you couldn't use the more powerful moves back to back too much due to the fact that they cost more CC to use and you run out quicker. Not to mention CC didn't instantly recharge, but you have to wait a bit for it to gradually build up. Here, for some reason, every art only costs 1 point of AC to use, no matter how strong they are, and might I ask, Why? There are clearly arts that are better than others, so shouldn't they be more expensive other than higher TP costs? That's probably why they did this. Graces didn't have any TP, whereas this game does, but comboing all these overpowered arts one after the other becomes a lot easier late game when you have tons of AC and TP to go around. There should have been varying AC costs in order to compensate, because while I don't spam normally, you can if you want to. Even if you're out of AC, literally block for the 1 second it takes to recharge all of it and you're golden. You even get skills that encourage blocking to raise your AC gap, so that literally makes the problem worse, and further encourages being reckless and aggressive with attacks because of how quickly you can hop back into the action. You've got so much going for you. Enemies should have been able to compensate or at least hold their own without a status effect that can act as an instant loss if everyone gets hit by it. For this recent playthrough I got all the footage on, I played on hard mode, which made for a much more satisfying and smoother difficulty curve. However, I don't think that you should have to turn up your difficulty selection to freaking hard in order to get some satisfaction out of the challenge department, you know? Moderate is supposed to be a slight step up from normal, and it's what I picked my first time through, but it just felt like there were difficulty spikes. There are a few bosses that crank up the difficulty and require more out of you naturally over the course of the game, and they make for the best ones. My favorite was the triple battle you do around the halfway mark of the game, not only because it's a team battle and those are always awesome, but it was challenging for all the right reasons and one of the more intense fights that work due to the game's wide array of options and speed. It's just like Comics says though, there should have been more bosses along these lines. The game encourages you to be aggressive, so bosses should have been as well, and they can be because the game always telegraphs when they're about to do a move that can combo to a Mystic Art, and you have the necessary options to react quick enough. Unfortunately, that isn't the case, and for the most part, the collection of bosses are rather weak, like a few you pointed out. Some of the better ones use the link system, like the triple battle I mentioned earlier, and that's awesome. I love it when Tales bosses use the game's unique combat aspects against you to make for challenging fights only the game itself can offer, but it doesn't happen enough, and overall the boss collection in this game is just okay when it should have been more. And even with the better bosses in the game, especially that triple threat, that brings with it another problem: the slowdown. There are a few Tales games that have slowdown issues, but it feels like this game is one of the worst ones because jeez. I get that there's a lot to load with all the AI responses and commands, enemy behaviors, linking, spell visuals, blah 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 tidal wave, but this not only makes the game feel worse, but play worse. Like, I'm getting this huge adrenaline rush from the combat, but then the game moves out of crawl when we just speed up again, and it happened a lot too, so that's a bummer. I didn't have a problem with inputs as my characters would still do it after their current animation despite all the slowdown, and the game never crashed on me over my 2 playthroughs, but it's still distracting and takes me out of the experience. Finally, there's the link gauge in this game's overlimit. Overlimit itself is dope. Chaining link darts back to back and hopping between partners to keep the chain going is the hypest thing ever, don't get me wrong. It's just that activating it doesn't feel as in my control as it should. In Abyss and Vesperia, all you had to do was press a button once the gauge was full to go into overlimit whenever you felt it was necessary. Strategic, simple, good. Here you use a link dart to enter overlimit, and while that does mean you can go into overlimit whenever you want, you have to be linked, which is kinda lame to even fill the gauge up, let alone go into overlimit, and you better do it soon because your other teammates can use the link darts too and enter overlimit if they so please. So you could wait, but you're not guaranteed that your allies won't beat you to the punch, and there's not really a way to control this in the strategies menu that doesn't involve telling them not to link up at all. Vesperia designed itself around having only one overlimit bar by having different levels and using all those skills that basically gave everyone their own overlimit, but Xillia doesn't really do this. There's one bar with one level, and anyone can use it, making it highly encouraged to immediately go for it. I'm not in full control here, and with as good an ability as overlimit, I feel that's necessary, and I miss it. I think those are all my complaints with fighting though, and don't get me wrong, despite my issues, I had way more fun with Battles to Care. It's easy and sloppy in some areas, but cleaned up and innovative in a lot more. So much so that I'd say this is one of the better combat systems in the series. You fight a lot in JRPGs, so I'm happy to say that I was smiling just about the whole way through when it came to kicking booty in the world of Xillia. Of course, fighting isn't all you do in this game, so let's talk about the other aspects of the gameplay. Right off the bat, I've got to give major shoutouts to how this game organizes side quests. For some, people in town will have a green exclamation mark above their heads, which is standard. But for the more important ones, there will be little skits of characters saying things along the lines of, "Hey, maybe we should go here," which helped me get a lot of these done without the need of a guide. You'll still need one if you want to 100% this game, no doubt about that, but it's a lot better structured and I really appreciate that. There's also a handy dandy list to keep track of the main story as well as the side quests you're undergoing, which again helped me get a lot of these done. I also appreciate the way the item shops are handled, as it's a different approach that worked. Instead of shops gradually getting bigger over the course of the game, you donate materials to each shop in order to expand them, allowing for discounts and new items to buy. It's micromanaging, but not even a little bit of a problem or hassle because odds are you're gonna have these materials just sitting around otherwise. I like this idea a lot, as each shop would introduce more products to consume over the course of the game, just with the added feeling of me having some sense of control over them. It's cool. What's also cool is this game's collection of towns. They're big, busy, and generally have a lot of stuff to do in them. I'd say for the first time in this series, the towns feel alive with the people walking about and all the voice clips you hear. Of course, with the best one being... Mutton, yes, fresh mutton! Never gets old. Never gets old. Never gets... Mutton, yes, fresh mutton! Turn it off! Again, these have a hard time loading NPCs, which is a shame, but that aside, these were great. Can't really say the same for this game's collection of dungeons, however. They're fairly simple and don't have too much, if anything, in the way of puzzle solving, which isn't that big of an issue. Heck, other Tales games suffer from the same thing. It's just that the layout of these places are a bit boring. This isn't helped by the music issue, because some dungeons have the faintest of songs and others have no music at all. These were whatever. Oh well, at least they weren't as bad as the overworld. These are all kinds of a mixed bag. On one hand, there are optional areas, treasures, and rewards aplenty, and the music helps give me that feeling of going on an adventure whenever traversing them. On the other hand, they're linear as heck, all amount to the same 3 or so segments regardless of varying aesthetics, have no sense of scale, and are boring. These act more as highways instead of parts of a bigger world map, making them feel isolated and acting somewhat like pace breakers. They also become more and more of a pain to go through the further you get into the game, and that's kinda ironic because they're very rewarding if you let your curiosity get the better of you. But the fact of the matter is that they aren't designed well enough to compensate for going out of your way to find every nook and cranny, which is a shame. I found myself just running along the edges of each segment, then running through them instead of going forward and getting distracted by some shiny object, making for samey, mundane, and annoying parts in the game. Wish more effort was put into these, but as they aren't the best. At all. Was this aspect rushed too? It kind of feels that way because they're so bad compared to everything else in the gameplay department. Even the dungeons have more effort than this. Whatever the case, this is one thing I could see being called bad in the gameplay department compared to everything else that ranges from alright to good to awesome. Xillia plays pretty darn well and there was a lot of effort put here. It's just a shame that some corners were cut and it's kind of hard to ignore them. And I don't just mean the overall when I say that, mind you. One of the biggest things that bothered me even after my first playthrough was the post game. This thing's small as hell, dude. You've got your EX dungeons, fell arms to hunt down, and a fell arms boss to unlock their powers like normal. Then there's an arena, like 2 optional bosses if we aren't counting this game's Gigantos monsters, more side quests and fetch quests. That's really it. The EX dungeon is rather bare bones too, and there's no cameo boss? What? That's like a thing pretty much every Tales game has. What's up with that? Not to mention every character gets only 1 mystic art when previous games started giving people more than 1. Well, Vesperia eventually got the memo. Characters can only reach level 99 instead of the usual 200, and I don't know, man, it started feeling like this game was lacking charm and character because of all this. When I played this game for the first time, I felt like this was a Tales game sort of going through the motions around the end, which is weird because that's definitely not the case. The game is still good, but I don't know, dude. There's so much missing that make for normal additions and things to be expected in a normal entry of the series. Where are the pure fun scenes between characters that are optional, like a Hot Springs event or a play of some kind? Where's the rest of this big place that just opened up right before the end of the game? Where are the little details and extra features that the Tales series began to make a norm? I said it a lot in this video, but Tales of Xillia really suffered from getting rushed out the gate. And that sucks, because the fact is that this game had a lot put into it for the first 2/3 of the game. The story was really interesting, character arcs were super satisfying, and things kept going along while keeping my interest. The game just sort of ends when it seems like there's a lot more to offer. There are all these missing features I expect out of a Tales game, and overall, I don't feel like there was as much polish given to this title that I expect from the series. I hate it when games are rushed, man. Just give them the time they need, and this game is one of my biggest arguing points. We could have had better designed overworld segments, more music, interesting dungeons, tons of extra content, and potentially a smoother engine that could run its games better on the hardware it was made for. But as it stands, Tales of Xillia is a game that flew high and had a rough landing. Now, all that being said, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. Regardless of how many aspects that could have been better with this title, I don't want to deny what's already there and how they make for what's still a solid game. In fact, I'd argue that Xillia still manages to reach overall greatness. I hope you all understand that even if I criticize something to a ridiculous extent, I can still love it. That's one of the things I've been trying to work on. Rather than constantly talk about what a game does right, talk about what I feel it could have done better, especially with the games I love. Tales of Xillia, at the end of the day, is a game I still love, even more so after this recent playthrough. There are many aspects that should have been given more time, but for what it's worth, most of the story made for one of the best in the series. And regardless of how it turned out, I'd say this cast almost manages to be the best in the series from this game alone. The music that we have is phenomenal, same with the character designs and overall art style. Not to mention there are tons of improvements to various gameplay aspects, and the combat is so freaking fun to play. It sucks that this game could have been something more, and that's simply a feeling I can't shake, but man, I still love this game. I can't shake the goosebumps I got after winning the game's major one-on-one battle. I can't deny all the fun battles I had with linking, snap pivoting, spirit shifting, and all those fun character gimmicks. I can't stop loving Xillia despite all my issues that are there. This is still a great game, and even a great Tales game. One of my personal favorites, in fact. It's just a matter of approaching what we have instead of ragging on too much of what we don't. Could it have benefited from more time? Of course it could have. Anything could have. But it's still a great game that I'd recommend to anyone. All that being said, this game eventually got a sequel. The developers had a lot of ideas cut, enough so to expand the story to another full-length adventure and to the level of a Mothership title, unlike the last sequel they did. This series is no stranger to making sequels to the size of a Mothership title, but it had been a while, so that game's got a lot of intrigue surrounding it already. Does it do a better job fleshing out the game's ideas? Does it fall flat on its face and we should have just kept this at one game? Was it rushed again? All of these questions answered, and more, next time. Maybe next time. I don't know what I'm gonna do next. This video took freaking forever to make. But whatever, right? As long as you enjoyed the video, it was all worth it. And I hope you did enjoy. I had a lot of fun diving deep into this game and criticizing it to the core. Links are down in the description for all my social media if you want to connect with me, including my Patreon. A little thingy you can join to get all the benefits for just $1 a month. That doesn't sound too bad, huh? Shoutouts to all my patrons already, all of which I'll proceed to thank right now. Thank you so much to Alex520, Ben, Cleric Eric, Comic Foil, Corbettes, Floragrar, Forever Fizz 8, Gaius, Gentleman Gamer, Jacob Horner, James V, Katie, Kiara, Kippy7, Ludom James 115, Max Hockman, Michael Douglas, Mitchie, Neolab, Renegade Master, Scott Appleman, Sean McTagg, Soul, Steve Appleman, Tex-Mex, Tomboy Taru, and Xenolith. I freaking love you, bank dudes, and I love you, the viewer, for giving me a watch. That's all from me, though. I need to give my voice a break. Have a great day, drink some freaking water, and I hope to see you in whatever we do next. But don't expect too much next time. I mean, after all, this was just a Tales of Xillia analysis.